Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's discussion forum. I am your host. My name is Malan Dulam Tonga, the Council Secretary for the Zambia Institute of Human Resource Management. Before I continue with the program for today, I will just invite the President of the Zambia Institute of Human Resource Management to give his opening remarks, after which we will introduce the panelists, and then we will proceed with a discussion forum. President, over to you.
Thank you very much, Council Secretary. Let me start by introducing myself, of course. Moffat Nyirenda is my name. I'm the President of Zambia Institute of Human Resource Management. I'm cognizant of the fact that we are joined, because of the way we had marketed this event, we are joined by people who are non-HR practitioners. So I just want to say a few things about who we are as an institute. We are an institute, a professional body established under the Act of number 11, 1997. Our mandate, among other things, of course, is to promote and regulate human resource management practice and science in Zambia. Okay, Mr. Council Secretary, before I could go any further, with your permission, I will allow that we observe a moment of silence, given the topic that we are covering today, a moment of silence for our friends, family members, and HR practitioners that have gone before us. The moment starts now. May their souls rest in peace. On behalf of the 14th Council of the Zambia Institute of Human Resource Management, I want to warmly welcome all of you to this important discussion that we are having today. And under the topic of COVID-19, the issue of vaccination versus the employer and employee rights. So at this moment, allow me to recognize our powerful discussants, the panel of discussants. I must apologize from the onset, the fact that it's too powerful, it's men only. And we in the next discussion, we will make sure that we balance the panel. So ladies, forgive me for that. But because of the importance of this topic, we thought we should get the key stakeholders around the topic, and this is what we have. So at this moment, I will recognize the first discussant. This is Dr. Kenneth Malama, the Permanent Secretary under the Ministry of Health. I also recognize our Permanent Secretary under the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, Mr. Chanda Kazia. Allow me also to recognize Dr. Nathan Bakiaita, the country representative for World Health Organization. Allow me also to recognize Mr. Cosmas Mukuka, the Secretary General of Zambia Congress of Trade Union, ZCTU. And last but not the least, allow me to recognize Mr. Harrington Chibanda, who is the Executive Director for Zambia Federation of Employers. Colleagues, the topic that we are covering today on COVID vaccinations is, of course, we have tried to narrow it down because the topic of COVID-19 can be wide. But for today, we are focusing on basically on the vaccination vis-a-vis the rights of our employers and our employees in as far as the future of work is concerned. I want to mention from the onset even the fact that as HR practitioners, we must, and I know that most of us, we've been providing leadership in terms of helping our organization that we work for to prepare our organization to be ready to continue with business continuity, as well as to make sure that our employees remain healthy and safe at the workplaces. For some time, we've been preaching the 5 golden rules to prevent, but I think the additional one has come through, which is the vaccination. Vaccination is proving to be a game changer, but I'll leave this discussion to the experts. Yeah, knowing that the topic of vaccination has been quite topical, and we should all look forward and learn something from today's discussion. Mr. Council Secretary, our host today, with those remarks, allow me to officially open this discussion forum, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Once again, welcome to all the attendees that have made time to attend this discussion forum. We also just want to thank all the discussants for sparing time this afternoon to be a part of this discussion. We were supposed to be represented by the PS for MOH, but due to some commitments, he is not able to make it. And so in his place, we have Dr. Mwansa. Dr. Mwansa, you're welcome to the discussion.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. As you've rightly put it, I'm here sitting in for the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Health. Thank you.
Thank you so much. At this point, I will just ask that all the discussants could turn on their microphones, their cameras and microphones as we begin the discussion. We have Mr. Mukuka from ZCTU, we have Mr. Chibanda from ZFE, we have Dr. Nathan Bakiaita from WHO, we have PS Chandakazia from the Ministry of Labour and Social Services, and we have Dr. Mwansa from the Ministry of Health, as earlier indicated. Mr. Kazia, we're not able to see your video yet. All right. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, the first question for this afternoon will go to WHO and MOH. And the question is, should we feel extremely fortunate or skeptical that the global scientific community has been able to develop a handful of vaccines in such a short period of time? Dr. Nathan, your mic is muted.
Okay,
thank
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
So good afternoon. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. PS Kazia, the presidents, executive directors, president, executive secretary of the various federations. Let me write on the protocol before. It's such an honor and a privilege to be able to talk to HR professionals and others. Now, with regard to your question, the answer is we should feel fortunate that they were developed very quickly. And the reason why they were developed very quickly is because, one, the technologies to produce the vaccines were available. Number two, we had a disease that was affecting the whole world, so it was very easy to do the tests, some of them in parallel, some of them concurrently, because when you produce a vaccine, you need to test it among people who are exposed to the disease. So the exposure was so massive that it was very easy to get a sample size and be able to say that this vaccine works or not. Now, the other thing also that is very important we need to know is that once WHO and the global community realized we had this disease, they quickly sequenced the virus, shared the parts of the virus, and pointed out what we call vaccine targets. So you had about 200 companies working at the same time on the same thing. The other thing also is that we provided standard protocols that determined how you develop the vaccine, how you decided it worked, so that once a company had done their work, they provide a dossier to WHO with representatives from every continent in the world, and they sit down, review it, and say, wow, this vaccine works, and indeed the parameters we wanted are done, and then that's when it's given an emergency use listing by WHO, or can be given that same by what we call a stringent regulatory authority. So that is why we had these vaccines very quickly. Technology available, you have a massive number of people where the disease is circulating, so you can easily get a sample size, and also protocols and a stringent review method. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Building on the same question, Dr. Mwansa, could you also maybe indicate to our attendees today what vaccines are available in Zambia, either available now or will be available, and what the process of getting a vaccine determined to be safe for human application? What basically is the process before a vaccine can be deemed safe for application to for being administered to human beings? What is the process that is supposed to be followed? And as Zambia, what measures have we put in place to ensure that these vaccines have been tested in Zambia and have been found fit for use and purpose?
Yeah, once again, it's a pleasure to be part of this forum. May I simply ride on the protocols that have been stated before? Your question actually has three parts to it. The first asking what vaccines are in Zambia. From the outset, I have to mention that that meeting on 24th of March by Cabinet, one of the major outcomes of that meeting was that Cabinet approved what became termed as a basket of vaccines. That basket of vaccines at the moment has 5 vaccines in there, 5 COVID-19 vaccines. And I think government has repeatedly mentioned that that basket has potential to grow. Quite a number of reasons why that was, but I think let me stick to the question and answer the availability of these vaccines in Zambia. Presently, we have 3 types of COVID-19 vaccines in Zambia. We began with the AstraZeneca vaccine, and at some point we got the Sinopharm vaccine, which up to now has been given to Chinese nationals resident in Zambia, even if I must hasten to mention that it's part of the basket of the vaccines that we are intending to get into the country. And earlier this week, the Ministry of Health with partners received the first shipment of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So 3 vaccines are already present in the country. That is the AstraZeneca, Sinopharm, and Johnson & Johnson. However, we are expecting in the course of the next few weeks that we'll potentially also have Pfizer being added to that basket of vaccines. So I think by the time August is ending, we should have had 4 vaccines in. So we'll have additional doses of Sinopharm, which will be given to the rest of the Zambians. Like I mentioned, what we have the vaccines for the Chinese nationals. So we'll have Sinopharm, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson. Of course, like I mentioned, there is potential for more to be added to this basket. Your second ask was around the process of getting the vaccine. Well, the process really begins from, or the process of making the vaccine available, rather. It begins from trials. And so trials are broadly categorized into 2. There are preclinical trials and there are clinical trials. In Zambia, we do not have a huge presence or participation in the preclinical trials. and less so for the vaccines. But we have some participation in the clinical trials. So the basic difference being that in the preclinical trials, animal models are used. Trials could be done on mice before you move to other ferrets, pigs, and monkeys. So in the preclinical trials, basically that's much of the work that is done. In clinical trials, which are also categorized into 3, broadly beginning with the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. All these trials, basically, they focus on assessing mainly 2 things. There are a few other things that are assessed, but mainly 2 things. And primary amongst those is the safety of the vaccine, and then of course the efficaciousness of the vaccine. So those 2 get assessed. The other difference between 1, 2, 3 in terms of those stages is the number of people involved. So you move from about anything between 30 to 100 in phase 1, and you move to in phase 2 between 100 and 1,000. And a couple of thousands are involved in phase 3 trials. In the case of some of the common vaccines that we've seen, for instance, Pfizer had 45,000 people involved in those trials. AstraZeneca had 36,000 people involved. Moderna had 42,000 people. So it's a lot of people involved in these trials. The last question you asked was related to the testing for these vaccines and our involvement. The real test for a vaccine really is doing the trials themselves. It's not a common thing that a vaccine would be taken to the lab and then disintegrated so that it can be understood at the level of there's this, so that it's broken down like that. That information might not be very useful. Let's say you find a vaccine, a part of the vaccine, it's water. A part, although the vaccines that we are using don't have preservatives. So there's this preservative and things like that. That might not be useful. So the real test is really in conducting of trials. And so this is where I mentioned that we are to some extent involved in clinical trials, particularly phase 2 and 3. We have institutions in Zambia that get involved, except not in the COVID-19 vaccines. We did not have any institution involved in Zambia. So the approval processes really, which are done mainly through the Zambia Medicines Regulatory Authority, or ZAMRA, involved the officers there quite looking at the documentation that exists and following the processes that come with the development of these vaccines. But the major component of the inputs into the decision-making is the information that we also get from WHO through a process called the reliance process. So what WHO does is an exhaustive process of following the trail of how vaccines are produced. So our team as well, in addition to the independent work they do, they also do rely on some of the reports that WHO produce as a way of assessing the suitability of these vaccines. I think I've attended to all 3 parts. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much for sharing those insights. And just building on, you have discussed the process, you've discussed the tests and how many participants are involved. The next question is, why are certain vaccines not approved or recommended for use in certain countries or regions? And why are there travel restrictions for people that have taken certain vaccines? And in some cases, maybe you could also try and address the fact that there's been information that has, circulated that while certain vaccines are manufactured in certain countries, they're not approved for use in those countries.
Yes, that's a good one, and I think I would probably share that question with Dr. Bachaita. He probably could add on that. So the first one is why vaccines may not be approved in certain parts of the world. I must say that it's all medical products, not just vaccines. Before they are used in any jurisdiction, that's why we have regulatory authorities. In our case, we have Zambia, the Zambia Medicines Regulatory Authority. They have to undergo a process I would summarize as due diligence. So if a product is not registered for use for a particular cause, for instance, I think there's been so much talk about chloroquine and its use in COVID-19. We don't have regulatory approval to do that in Zambia. In fact, there's no clinician who would use that legally in Zambia to treat COVID-19. I think we've seen other products mentioned like that because there's a regulatory process. So it goes with the regulatory process. Sometimes you'd have a product that is approved for use for the same disease in another country, but if it's not approved for use in that particular jurisdiction, I think that you'd have such a scenario. Other times you also have a product that is produced somewhere else, and then there's a concern that if it's not properly labeled, say for instance, it's produced in the USA, product A produced in the USA, and part of that product is shared with us here. So often they will label that consignment that this can only be used in this part of the world. Is for the sole purpose of ensuring that if they found it in their pharmacies and hospitals, then it becomes an issue of how it got there. So it's part of just the regulation itself. And I think I could suspect that that question probably could be emanating from that picture that went round about remdesivir. And people called it a vaccine. Actually, remdesivir is not a vaccine. It's one of the treatments used for COVID-19. I think it was labeled not to be used in Canada. It's basically for that purpose. It's not that it's an inferior product meant for us. I think it's an identity put on a product meant to legally go to a particular part of the world so that it's not deviated to other parts of where they probably have the same product. Quickly on the restrictions, and I think this is where I would want Dr. Bachaita to probably also come in. At the moment, we are going with the WHO guidelines that's why we are not offering, we are not even giving the certificates, the travel certificates as a result of COVID-19 vaccination. Potentially in future, it might come through like we have yellow fever certificates, but at the moment, I think there's a big equity issue that we have to talk about here. If we suddenly said for you to travel, you need a vaccination certificate, first of all, we have to define, are we talking about travel between Lusaka and Ndola or outside the country? And even if we did that, we have not yet provided adequate vaccines to everyone so that we do not discriminate against some people. I'm sure you've seen that the vaccines that we've received are limited. So we have not yet adopted any restrictions related to travel as a result of someone not getting vaccinated. Lastly, I think there was also that circulation that some of the vaccines that we've gotten here would mean you can't get to Europe. Again, this speaks to the regulation that I spoke about. We also do the same. If someone has received a product that we have not registered, we will not recognize that product. So what happened was that I think there was a delay in the registration of the Covishield, I think, one of the vaccines that we began using, which is produced by the Serum Institute of India. It needed to be registered with the European Medical Agency. So because it wasn't registered, it wasn't listed amongst the recognized ones. But I understand that's a process that is currently ongoing. But even as that process is ongoing, through obviously the intervention of institutions such as WHO, 7 of the countries have already recognized that a person who has received Covishield, which is that vaccine AstraZeneca from India, is considered to have been vaccinated. So it's an administrative issue, not a quality issue. Over to you, WR.
Thank you so much, Francis. You so eloquently covered this question. So I'll just drop in 1 or 2 things. One, I think you've mentioned the fact that the AstraZeneca vaccine is the one that was facing problems, especially in Europe by the EU. just to say that AstraZeneca vaccine is manufactured in 3 different places. There's one in Europe, one in South Korea, and one in India, Serum Institute of India. And they have different names depending upon where it is manufactured. But the product is exactly the same. However, when it comes to registration for use in a particular country or jurisdiction, you have to file the dossier with that particular regulatory authority in order for that product maybe made in India to be used, even if it's exactly the same as the product that is from South Korea and Europe. Now, regarding the issue of why are some countries putting restrictions, I think he's answered that Covishield was not meant to be used in Europe, so there was no need to file to that regulatory authority. But now with what came up, they have filed so that in case people have used that, the European Medicines Agency recognizes it because it's been registered in their jurisdiction. And here I want to add one other thing. There is no difference in quality, efficacy, or safety of the AstraZeneca vaccines, regardless of where they are manufactured, as long as they have got the emergency use listing by WHO or what we call the stringent regulatory authorities, because we use exactly the same protocol and so on and so forth. But like he's put it, maybe I don't need to belabor it, but I just read it out. It's normal practice by pharmaceutical companies to manufacture same product, different sites for different markets, and has nothing to do with quality or efficacy. I rest it there. Back to you, Chair.
Right, we have a couple of questions that I think building in the Q&A tab. And the first one is, why was Sinopharm vaccine sent specifically for the Chinese? Is there a difference in interaction among different races? The second question is still a follow-up on question. The skepticism from many people comes because of that specifically. Why should it specifically be labeled for other countries and not to be used in the country it's been manufactured? And the last question is, second question, how do we help those thinking the vaccine is meant to wipe out a certain part of population, believe that this is just to help fight COVID-19? Dr. Mansa or Dr. Nathan, would you want to quickly address those? And then we will try and move on to employer and employee rights.
I can go first.
You go first.
Thank you very much.
Right.
So the first one is related to Sinopharm. Again, one of the things you probably notice was that whilst we were amongst the first countries to announce preparations for the COVID-19 vaccines in the region, there were statements in November and December of 2020. We were amongst the first to say the government was going in that direction. We were amongst the last to start vaccination. One of the major reasons, beyond obviously that we needed to provide as much information as possible to the decision-making bodies, was that we tend in Zambia to be extra cautious for just about anything, and COVID-19 vaccines were not different. And so due diligence has been done on the vaccines, and that's why you'd notice, regardless of who is speaking from the Ministry of Health, we all speak the same. So part of this due diligence involved ensuring that the regulatory documentation and pieces were in order. And also is that the acquisition of these vaccines, quite a number of processes are involved, including, you probably might not have thought, the Ministry of Justice is heavily involved in these processes. And so what then happened was that for the Chinese, with their over 9,000 people that they have in this country, they felt that given the tiering system that we had done when we did the planning, remember, we said the very first doses of the vaccines we'll get, they will be for health workers. And then we'll follow that up with people we considered key to maintaining core societal functions, and we defined who those people were. And then we followed that up with people we consider to be highest risk of dying from COVID-19. So you would notice that the Chinese felt that their people were not in any of the top 4 categories, and they probably would have had to wait till 2022 had we strictly followed that. So they then made that application that they bring in vaccines for their people, as the government was following through that, that stream of prioritization from tier A, B, C, D up to E. And they brought in a product for which there is regulatory authority. So they brought in Sinopharm and not any other, because that other products would have required the same submission of dossier and so on and so forth. So it's a pure administrative thing. And the fact that they felt that their people could not wait till, you know, when we had reached that level where we could give vaccines to everyone else. Otherwise, the tiering system meant that for the first vaccines we got, we should have given health workers then, and so on and so forth. The second one that I can speak to here is where I think there's a question of possibly that the vaccines are in because they are meant to wipe us out. That's an interesting one. I must say that there are 2 sides to that. Well, whenever a new product comes, really, I think it's a human thing, questions arise. And I would tell you that this specific one is a common one each time there's a new product that has come in, much more so a new vaccine. In the last 10 years, the government has introduced quite a number of vaccines. There has been the rotavirus vaccine in children. In adolescent girls, in the last 2 years, we've introduced HPV. At some point in 2018, if you remember, with that huge cholera outbreak we had in Lusaka, we brought in OCV. So this discussion comes in because it's an expected thing. Something new comes in, people ask all sorts of questions. But let me answer it this way. In Zambia, we've been providing vaccines since 1975. And some of us, you know, have grown up in that era, would probably have been wiped out. In fact, the population of Zambia has been growing. At the time that vaccines were brought in this country, 1975, there were only 3.1 million people. We are talking about over 18.4 million people in this country. Maybe the census will even tell us that we are 20 million people. So if it were true, most of the people that are in this country are those born after 1975 would probably have been wiped out. Evidently, there has been some linkage made to say maybe it makes us less fertile, but I think the numbers show otherwise. Some of us who got vaccines when we were young, our children have gotten vaccines and they also have their own children. Simply put, it's probably a concern that started innocently, but I think it has been propagated by the fact that the true information takes a bit of time to reach. The wiping out agenda does not exist anywhere. WR, over to you.
Thank you. So, okay.
Dr. Nathan, I think Dr. Monsa was actually just beginning to touch on the issue of the side effects. If you could maybe amplify on that, there's information that suggests that maybe these vaccines are going to cause people to become, infertile, or they cause inflammation in the brain or in the heart, that they cause, blood clotting, or that there is some kind of weakened immunity that arises. And so people are raising these concerns. If you could just address that as you continue with your response.
First of all, thank you so much, Francis. I won't belabor what he has already talked about. But the issue we need to start with here is that every medicine you put in your body has side effects. We have those that are mild, we have those that are moderate, and we have those that are severe. So all vaccines have side effects. However, when they were being tested through the processes that Francis so eloquently elaborated, they were also monitoring for side effects and were able to pick up some of the side effects from the people who were where the tests were done. And those we were told about when we received the vaccines. However, the sample sizes they used were small, so some rare side effects are not easy to pick up. So what we do is that once a vaccine has been introduced, we have what we call post-market surveillance, which doesn't apply now because this is emergency use listing. But what we do is we have a system for monitoring what we call adverse events following immunization. So what happens is that when you're given a vaccine, you're supposed to be told that in case you get any side effect, however rare it may be or minor it may be, please report, fill a certain form, and then there is a committee that reviews, and that's how we've been able to document some of these rare side effects that people are concerned about. Now, when that data comes into the regulatory authorities, they continue to review and can come up with a verdict of saying those side effects are too dangerous and too common, we withdraw the product, or they can say that it is dangerous but too rare and the benefits far exceed the risks that are involved. So what I would tell people is that when you take the vaccine, report any adverse event to the system, and then the system will review, and then we'll be able to fill up on this large body of information that the whole world is using, and then conclude. There have been hundreds of millions of people already vaccinated, and we've been able to pick up some of this. You know, I sometimes like using personal experience. Let me come out right here and say I'm fully vaccinated. I got both the AstraZeneca vaccines. The first time there were no side effects. The second time I just had some pain there and I had a slight temperature the next morning, but after taking my morning shower, that was the end of it. But other people's experiences are different. Some people have had headaches and other, but Francis could testify about this. I don't think we've had any of the severe adverse events following immunization with the vaccines we have used so far. So what I would just encourage people is that we are keeping an eye on all these side effects. And if we feel the risk exceeds the benefit, then we can come back to you. But so far the data shows the benefits far exceed the risks. And if you get any of these, report in time, it will be managed accordingly and you have nothing to fear. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you so much. There's still a couple more questions that we have here on the efficacy of these vaccines, but in the interest of managing our time, we will get back to some of these questions in order that we could try and delve into, I think, the other issue that we have to address. Now, at the end of the day, when it comes to the workplace, this issue becomes an issue about who carries the risk. If the government provides the vaccines and the employer supports that those vaccines are made available in the workplace, and an employee decides to take it or does not decide to take it, who should carry the risk at the end of the day? And so the first question that we will be posing here is that lessons from previous global crises have shown that government alone cannot address the challenges stemming from strong shocks. Who should carry the risk of COVID-19 in the workplace? Should it be the government or employer if no vaccinations are provided? Should it be the employee if the employee chooses not to take the vaccination? And we would like a reaction from the Ministry of Labour, Zambia Federation of Employers, and ZCTU.
Maybe PS can speak last.
Okay.
Since he regulates us, may I take the floor on this one?
Sure, please. If ZFE could start, and then ZCTU, and then the PS.
Yeah, I think when we talk of responsibilities in terms of who should be responsible, first, the three that you've mentioned, the government, the workers and employers, organizations, they own the workplace. And because they own the workplace, anything that affects the workplace becomes the responsibility of the tripartite partners in terms of responding or addressing whatever challenges is there. And so when we talk COVID-19, we're all aware that it has come with some negative impacts on our industry, which has not only affected the government, workers and employers. When we look at it from the government point of view, when industry is not doing very well, is not able to actually conduct its operations, it means that revenue streams are affected. So the tax that the government is expecting to receive from the companies and also from the employees is actually affected. And so it raises an issue of concern. Equally, businesses want to succeed because investors have actually invested in those entities and they're expecting some meaningful returns. So when there's a pandemic such as this one, it actually affects their earnings and it is an issue of concern. When you talk of the workers, they rely on those jobs, those companies to provide employment to them so that they're able to earn something to put food on the table for their families. And the worst for the employees is actually where it even goes to the extent of certain companies being unable to maintain a certain number of workforce on their payroll to the extent that they evoke the redundancy clause in our labor laws. So for those reasons I've given, it then makes sense that the three partners join hands in responding to the issues that are affecting the world of work. And therefore, it is a responsibility for all of us, the workers, employers, and the government. Now, how do we become responsible? It is in addressing the issues. I think our colleagues from the health sector have provided guidance, health guidelines, which must be followed, which must be complied with. So there's a responsibility from the employer to ensure that those facilities, like the sanitizers that we are talking about, are made available in the workplace. The ministry has also guided on the issue of social distancing. How do we ensure that this is complied with in the world of work? So the employer has an obligation to actually encourage employees, and the employees themselves have got an obligation to comply with both the issue of hand sanitizing, washing their hands, and also the issue of social distancing. So I think we are all called to be responsible to ensure that we actually join hands and fight this pandemic. When there is the issue of depopulating the workplaces, once government has guided to say civil service, this is the way to go. Even us in the private sector, we followed suit by ensuring that where possible, we don't depopulate the workplaces, but introduce shift works so that the issue of social distancing is actually achieved. Not only that, even spending money in terms of buying the sanitizers, helping employees with the face masks, and ensuring that when our employees are at home, they are given the tools that they must use to be able to work from home. Here, I mean, even appliances and also issues of bundles for them to be able to actually provide services to the employer. So you find that it has come with challenges, but we've all waken up to say that we've got a role to play. I think since the question is for all the three partners, let me not say much so that I don't exhaust all the points before my labor commission. My PS can complain that I've spoken too much. Thank you.
Just before you go, Mr. Chibanda, the last part of the question required your comment on who should carry the risk. If the employer provides a vaccine, the government provides a vaccine, and an employee takes it or does not take it, should the risk then transfer from an employer to an employee? Or should the risk remain with the employer and the government who are supposed to be able to provide the vaccines? Your comment.
Well, if the government has provided the vaccine, like is the case now that the vaccine is available, but looking at the myths that are surrounding the vaccine, it's a personal decision by people, not only those in the world of faith, but everyone to decide whether to take or not to take. So if the health experts have guided that when you've taken the vaccine, even if you get infected, at least it will be a mild infection. You will not be very ill in terms of how it attacks you. And then someone decides that, no, for me, I've chosen not to. And then you don't take and you get COVID, to the extent that it has serious repercussions. I think there should be no one to blame, because even the employers, we are not here to force our employees to get vaccinated, but to encourage them, just like the government is doing. So in my view, I do not see why the employer should take a risk or why the government should take a risk, because it was an issue of voluntary given to the employee to make personal decision, and he decided not to get vaccinated. So indeed, the blame will go to that particular employee without any other party taking a risk. That is our take on that one.
All right, thank you so much. Mr. Mkuka, on behalf of ZTU.
Thank you very much, Moderator and Secretary. It's very, very clear for us to look at parties or partners in development. On the side of workers, it's important to recognize processes. And these are the processes which are supposed to be respected in the process. When first of all, we respect the laws, the tripartite consultative labor council, where the employers, the labor movement, the workers, and government sit to invoke certain clauses when you are affected with a pandemic like this one. Amongst other things which we did in the first place through the same tripartite consultative labor council was to invoke clauses in the Employment Code Act. Of course, particularly with the SI 48, we are looking at certain clauses where we set the standard on how to follow in this pandemic. That's the first recognition first. Then at company level, when you have received certain pronouncements by the tripartite consultative labor council, you are supposed to also embed such things in your policy. The only thing which lacks is that when the laws are changing, like the Employment Code Act, just as if we knew, because the Employment Code Act provided for procedures to follow when faced with a situation. But immediately it was just enacted, that's the Employment Code Act of 2019. And the COVID also is the year it was pronounced. It set out provisions where you can invoke clauses. So it's like we're thinking ahead of the COVID. So now at company level, the moment the laws change, you should also look at this now. How is the like at company level?
ED, you are making noise.
Or employment at that company level, changes will cause certain confusions. So as the case may be, we need to see how we can amalgamate these changes at company level. And then for those unions who are represented by for the workers who are represented by the unions, it is also very, very important to come up with the collective agreement systems where we should come up with collective agreements by coming up with collective bargaining process which will embrace these issues. For example, the issue of COVID, it should be consultative this time because the employers and workers who are represented should address this issue. And when they address this issue, they should also come up with collective agreements to agree what is the way forward. I still recall when we met as tripartite, we approved the standard operating procedure for which should be followed in companies and workplaces. So that's the way to go. Then talking about the issue, having propounded on these issues, it would be very easy to answer the question, moderator, of who should carry the risk. Now, in this case, a risk is carried now by everyone because you are part to the agreement. You are part to the tripartite consultative labor council. 2, you are part to the employment policy. 3, you are part to the collective agreement. 3, you are part to the standard operating procedures of the COVID at the workplace. Then at the end of the day, the risk is carried by everyone, the way you have understood it and the way you have agreed as a company. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. We'll move on to PS Kazia, and as he gives us his reflections on this question, we'd also like him to already delve into, the aspect of whether or not the legal framework in Zambia would allow an employer to, come up with a policy that would discriminate against people that have not been vaccinated. To be precise, can an employer in Zambia come up with a policy that will require that everyone is jabbed? If there's no jab, there's no job. Over to you, Piers. I think you're muted.
Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, colleagues, and it's really a good gesture from the Institute to come up with such a forum and where we can share so many ideas and also show how the tripartite system usually works. I have been listening from my colleagues at Health, WHO, the employers and the workers. Now you may wish to know that the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Labor represent government and government system cohesion in terms of how we move forward in the COVID-19 era. One of the fundamentals that the employment relationship has is an aspect of consent. And that consent must be done within the lines of the law, within the realms of the law. There is no room for discrimination in the employment code, number one. Then number two, you can't force. If you heard what ED, the Executive Director for Zambia Federation of Employers said, is exactly what it is. It is on all of us persuading each other to know that the vaccine is the way to go. We have lost so many of our colleagues, and I think you remember that after we left the conference, there was so much effect on our practitioners, such that we lost quite a number of our very well seasoned HR practitioners for COVID. And not only that, we've also lost families. So when you look at the provisions of the employment code, and that relates to section 95, this time the code has in it a requirement that the employer must have policies and procedures and codes at place of work, including HIV and AIDS policy. It's the only policy that is mentioned that it must be at the place of work. Now look at how COVID is done us. And if the employer is going to put such a policy in place, it's a policy that will be providing the guidelines to say, although he can't say I'll force, but he will say everyone is encouraged. And you may wish also to know that it's always a good practice. In public service, when you're joining, you are going to go for health check. They'll quite all right give you an appointment letter, but they will take you for two things. One, you're going to go for medical checkup, and you're going also to go for security checkup so that people know that we have not employed a criminal. And the medical checkup is very important. Why is it important? Because there could be ailments that manifest after you've been given the job. One of the things that is usually happens is that the employer will encourage you to seek medical attention before you get into the workplace. Should there be a chance that you are having problems in terms of your health. And then also you must understand that Section 97 of the Employment Code also makes reference that the minister may by statutory instrument prescribe the contents of certain policies. Now, you may wish to know that the statutory instrument this time to do it, we call the Labor Advisory Committee, which is a tripartite system, where we will bring the employers, we will bring the workers and government, and sit down together to say, looking at what has befallen us, how should we best respond? What kind of content should we put in each employment policy as it is being done? Now, at that point in time, we can only do so much as not to contradict the Constitution. But if it doesn't contradict the Constitution, then the prescription is done to ensure that people are safe. Now, you may wish to know that sitting where I sit here, at times I have a problem where the general system and the general reaction to things is that in Zambia mostly, when something comes, we all gang around it, how it should not work, how it is bad, what is wrong with it. That is usually the orientation that I think we must be able to change from the position of really national orientation, is that when something comes, we should first of all focus what is good about this and try to strengthen the good part of it, of something. Now, really, what happens that when this comes or when the law comes, we all start to run around it so that we see what is wrong, and ultimately we kill what is even for our own benefit. So it is important that the employment policies make reference to encouraging the workers for periodical medical checkups, and in the COVID era, run through all the protocols that the Ministry of Health has given. Now, should it be explicit about COVID? It could be, but the challenge is that what if COVID, the year of COVID passes? What happens if you still have put it in your regulations? So those are some of the things that we want to manage in terms of not being reactionary, but be responsible. So the focus in terms of employment relationships, the focus in terms of employment policies is that which encourages self-reflection and, knowing that this is better for me and the people that I'm working with. For HR practitioners, our daily interface is issues of people. Every day we are in the face of people. So we must be able to encourage. If we start to use the whip, we will be trampling on people's rights. And one person can take us to court, can take you to court and can actually claim damages for that because you're telling them. But the general discussion, I should also mention here is that I think my colleagues, Mr. Banda and Mr. Mukuka will tell you that what has been the discussion at ILO is the COVID response, COVID passports, which means countries, we will make rules. Say, for instance, you can't go to a certain country if you don't have a COVID certificate. Now, that may not affect us in national, but when you go outside Zambia, where this is a requirement, you can't say, no, you are forcing me to have COVID. They will tell you, here where you have come, it is mandatory. And why is it mandatory? Because also it's a preventive mechanism for other people not to be affected. But at the last discussion at the ILO, we said as Africa, we are concerned. And we were concerned because of the capacity to have everyone vaccinated and also the capacity to actually get these vaccines. But we have seen that with the more support and government's commitment, which I think we must commend, is that we must be able to move to vaccinate everybody. But of course, not really to force anyone. The president has pronounced himself on that matter, and we can't be forcing people, but we have to show the positive part of the vaccination. I submit at this point in time.
Well, thank you so much for that submission, PS Kazina. And maybe just before you rest your case, are there circumstances or laws in Zambia that would warrant a mandatory vaccination? A policy, adoption of a mandatory vaccination policy, either in the workplace or at country level. Do we have any such kind of laws right now? And in addition to that, are the rights of employees and absolute in this particular case? Would there be any limiting factors that would require and compel somebody to be able to undergo vaccination? This could probably emanating from a public health perspective or from any such kind of perspective. And would an employee that is vaccinated or feel be rightfully placed if they went ahead and challenge an employer who has allowed other people that are not vaccinated to be able to access the workplace on grounds of providing a workplace that is not safe for them? Your reactions on things like that. I can see a couple of questions building, and so I'll be picking on the questions for you to be able to just touch on.
Yes. Firstly, you may wish to know that forcing people to do what they don't want, there's no provision within the law that does. Any time that comes has fallen because of the inherent the freedoms that one enjoys. It may not really be at a place of work, but the inherent freedoms that us as people are. What if they are not safe? Like, what if they don't feel safe with the vaccine, but they say, "Oh, I'm okay." For instance, we've gone through all these eras of pandemics. You know that there was smallpox, there was measles, there was polio, there was HIV/AIDS, there's cholera, there's all these things that are there. And I think my colleagues at the Health and Body WHO would tell you that you can't force, because globally is a challenge that is being there. But people can say, oh, they can put conditions to it, but to force may be very difficult. To say that, oh, you can't come here unless you have this, it becomes extremely difficult. But they can put a condition, oh, you're allowed to do this when this happens. You're allowed to do, but you can't say, oh, all of you here line up until I give you COVID. That will fall. Because if you give a person a jab and you know that, I think I was reading something on AstraZeneca that maybe at least 6% of that, maybe 1,000, maybe 6 people, it reacts, and it happens that one of them reacts. You will take the institution to court. In the Netherlands, I think one of the people that was AstraZeneca took government to court and won a lot of damages. So conditions can be attached, but certainly not to force. Forcing will not work. What will work is conditions and also education at workplace, pointing to the details of what has come and pointing to the real examples. When COVID came, the first time came, we had very serious negative reaction towards the vaccine. When the second jabs came after the third wave hit us really bad, we saw big lines. People even wanting to riot over the COVID vaccine. So that shows you that I think we are changing as a people to say that the vaccine is the way to go, because it keeps me safe and it keeps the other person safe. But it's not like it's 100% probably protection. But I think the Ministry of Health can speak to the efficacy of that and can speak to say, this is an ongoing research. What if now at a time we come to 100%, like really, when I have a jab, I will not have COVID. Now the problem comes that with you without a jab and you have COVID, the chances of you, losing you are very, very high. And no one wants to lose the people that we have with such experience, with such a level of, commitment to work, and also family people. The demand on us is quite huge. That's why we have to take some responsible steps in terms of COVID. But the forcing matter, wouldn't work. And there's no law that actually compels people that this is it, but the conditions can be set. As I can say, in my house, when you come, you have to have a certificate of, that you have a job. This is my house, if you don't have it, you can choose not to come to my house and go to another person's house. So those things can be done, but definitely not forcing.
All right, would we have any reactions maybe from ZFE or ZCTU? Based on what
yes,
yeah.
Yes, that's a contribution to that. Of course, we know too well that you cannot force one to be vaccinated. But again, agreeing with PS, it's just a sensitization which is needed in the process. Of course, you have situations and restrictions like travel restrictions. It's a question of trying to negotiate with certain terms, because travel, as an example is given, at company level, you can come up with a policy. And that policy can still be agreed with the workers. And then when the workers agree to that, you should be ready to spend. For example, if it's a vaccine, you say people should be vaccinated. Those who choose not to be vaccinated, if they fall sick or what, you can come up with regulations. Those who have been vaccinated, you can still bring in certain motivational things at company level, which can compel people to be vaccinated, other than just forcing and writing, say this is the regulation for the company, everyone should be vaccinated, but it should be so enticing in such a way that people go for it, because you are providing a service. If you are sick, such things will come in when you are vaccinated. And when going for the vaccination, such motivational awards and other things should be given. I think what is feared mostly by most employers is the question of motivation. Where motivation is present, you will see employees coming in to do even what is difficult. And after all, we are talking about productivity in companies now, where you make employees be part of the company structure and be part of decision-making. They will still respond and they do the difficult jobs for you. That's why they are. If they don't produce, they can't get paid. If not productive, they cannot earn the salaries as they deserve. So I think that's the way to go. Let's bring in sensitization and motivation, which can now encompass every employee to be part of the process.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yes, Mr. Chipanda.
From us in the Federation, I wish SG went on to be specific on what kind of motivation that he will be talking about, especially when it comes from the employer motivating the employees to go for the vaccination. When both the employer and the employee know, I think first, I do agree with him on the sensitization aspect. And I think this is what our colleagues in the health sector are doing. They are countering the myth that is around the vaccination. We've seen a lot of videos on social media that are actually anti-vaccination. And the real health experts are countering that. And that is what we want. So that the message is sent strongly that there are more advantages in getting vaccinated than in not getting vaccinated. So that then even when we leave it, say it's a personal decision, but at least let people weigh it based on the advantages and disadvantages. And then it comes down to the workplace. Yes, as employers, we can also sensitize our workers in the workplace. But in terms of motivation, I don't know the exact motivation that my SG is looking at, but I would agree with him when it comes to issues of making it a policy. Because even when you make it a policy, you see, when you formulate a company policy, it becomes a requirement that if there's a requirement of employees to comply. They must comply. But again, in this one, we may not come up with a policy which would say every employee is required to go for vaccination. But we can give talks to employees. I think that is the sensitization. If that kind of sensitization also amounts to motivation, then we'll take it. But I think there is more that needs to be played by our colleagues from the health sector to counter the myth that has really made a lot. I mean, some people decide that they cannot go for vaccination. I have done my vaccination, both the first and the second. I want to thank PS Maram. I think he's been very passionate on ensuring that people get the message of getting vaccinated. I think that is what we want. Let's encourage people at home, in the communities, in the world of work, to go for the vaccination. And then let the negative aspect be removed from the issues of vaccination. Otherwise, I want to agree with what PS Chandakazia did indicate, that these are issues we've been discussing, and we need to move together. Let's agree, workers, employers, and the government, so that we can move back, because it's a problem that is affecting all of us. I think that's our reaction. Thank you very much.
Right, still dwelling on the policy, what data protection rights and laws must people that are going to draw these policies be considering? Would information about an employee's vaccination status be considered confidential health information? Can an employer, demand for this information, either a certificate or any kind of confirmation, or can an employer, run a survey to be able to find out who's been vaccinated in their workplace, what kind of vaccines they took, and stuff like that? Are there any laws that would protect such kind of information? A reaction from ZFE. I can see Mr. Chibanda itching to comment.
No, I think calling on employers to do a random check to see who has been vaccinated and who has not been vaccinated, I think it's just giving too much work to the employer. If it's a case of issues of testing, for instance, the situation where an employee gets COVID positive and has been sick away from home during that quarantine period, during the ill period, and then we get to a point where this employee must come back to work, I think it makes sense that the employer asks for a certificate to prove that indeed the employee who tested positive has now tested negative. Why? Because there are other employees in the workplace that must be protected from being infected by that employee. So from that angle, we can say, yes, the employer must ask for that certificate of one having been tested. But for the issue of whether one has been vaccinated or not, I think that would be putting too much work on the employer. It should really be a self-responsibility to the employees. After all, it's their lives. Though we know as employers, we want them in our workplace. They are the ones who are aiding the production in the entities that we are operating. We need their presence, but let's share the responsibilities. Where they should take up a responsibility, they should take it up. And the responsibility of deciding to get vaccinated, I think it falls in the hands of the employee. Thank you.
Dr. Monsa,
maybe just right on that.
Yes, Mr.
Yes, thank you very much. That's why it's important. When I was talking about motivation, it falls within the rights, because if you are not allowed to force somebody to do certain things, you just come up with certain interventions. Employers and HR practitioners have different strategies, and those are strategies which you cannot prescribe, or strategies of motivation. When you list down, because this person may not choose this strategy, or when I list down, for example, if I give an example to Mr. Chibanda and the employers and other human resource practitioners, to say, if one decides to say, I want to get a vaccine, when you're getting a vaccine, you require good meals, you require transport to that place, you require also off days to ensure that if there are any side effects, that is actually recovered within 5 days. and a good allowance to that effect. You will see a lot going for that. That's that at least one strategy, which shouldn't. So I shouldn't be forced to disclose strategies by research band when practitioners have different strategies in their own making because they are highly qualified to come up with strategies. That's one of them I can give. But then coming to the issues of vaccination certificates and the rest, that should just be done at the will of the employee to say, I want to do this. Otherwise, you can't force a vaccination certificate because the way the COVID has come in, because it's a question of the transmission, which is just public. We started with HIV/AIDS. We struggled to talk about disclosures and privacy and so on, purely because it was connected to when one said, oh, is infected in this, it has different connotations of probably the contraction is purely described in another area. But the COVID contraction and the way you get it is quite common. So that's even that, whether it has got certain perceptions on how you got it or not, but certain sicknesses and the way they come, it's just supposed to be private. And then it's up to the Ministry of Health, the employers and so on to come up with certain methods. Just like the methods which came up in Zambia on HIV/AIDS, when people encouraged people to come public, and they organized funds to support such people who are coming public. That was also another motivation. Away from the motivation, then everything remains private and so on. Thank you very much.
All right. You want to react, Mr. Chibanda? All right.
Yes,
Within a minute,
well,
please.
I like the way SG has put it in the motivation aspect. I think that is not a problem really to the employers. But perhaps also in the same motivation, taking advantage of the presence of our colleagues from the Ministry of Health, that the other issue that discourages people maybe to go for the vaccines is that, for instance, maybe there are long queues in the vaccination areas. Can we also be able to bring these facilities in the workplaces so that when we're at work, we talk about vaccines, there is a doctor, there is a nurse outside who can actually offer that service so that then the issue of people going to stand or spend time on long queues is not there. Otherwise, we can motivate our employees by giving them also the positive aspect of being vaccinated. So give us the leaflets, colleagues from the health sector, give us leaflets which we can use in our workplaces and engage our employees. You know, we enjoy social dialogue when we are discussing with our employees, and we convince each other very well because we look at advantages or other benefits which actually derived from the engagement that we have, not only for the worker or for the employer, but for both parties. So I would ask that our colleagues from the health department can give us some leaflets and arm us with that information we can use to actually put into our employees in trying to encourage them for the vaccination, because it's quite critical. Because you see, in the workplace, when people are not vaccinated, even when they get the variants, the COVID infection, there's a time when one doesn't know that he's got it and comes for work. He's putting the life of the rest of the other workers he's interacting with in danger. I think that should be at the mind of every employee. The same way I would not want to be infected by a colleague in the workplace, I should equally not be willing to infect another person. That is how it should work. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Dr. Mansell, do you want to react to that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairperson. Quite an interesting discussion. Quite a lot of things said there, but possibly I can speak to the last three that are being submitted. Yeah, long queues, a concern also to us for a number of reasons. We pretty much don't want people to spend a lot of time on a queue. because it also becomes counterintuitive to the 5 golden rules that we have. So we do everything to ensure that those things don't become enormous in our practice. But I think you referred to the possibility of running vaccination sessions in workplaces. It's part of our policy. In fact, the immunization program, even before COVID-19, is run on a 60-40 ratio, with 60% of the vaccinations happening through outreach. So outreach into workplaces is part of the strategy, and it would save potentially the managers on the call to have that relationship with the respective district health office, and arrangements would be made for our teams to reach out to any workplace. Emphasis has to be put on the fact that the program, as we have it, in fact, we do not have a mandatory public health program in Zambia. The decision still has to be made by the person. What we do is to provide as much information as possible. And there are so many reasons why we don't actually have mandatory programs. HIV testing is not mandatory. Male circumcision, in fact, we even included voluntary in the word, in the phrase for circumcision. We now call it voluntary medical male circumcision. So just about any intervention that you can think of in public health, we don't have anything mandatory. Speaking to the second one on making information available, yes, the start may not probably have been quite very desirable, that we could probably not use all the channels available to communicate information. But I think in the last few weeks and days, we can comfortably say, I think we have used all channels that are available, including all our social media channels. I think there is daily feeding of information in there. You go to the Ministry of Health website, the website for Zambia National Public Health Institute are there. The leaflets that you refer to are also ones that can be provided upon interaction with the district health office that exists in the place where such an institution exists. Lastly, there was reference to HIV and COVID-19. Well, the two have some similarities and quite a number of differences. I possibly can speak to two. One is that the two conditions are totally different, and I think, as Mr. Mkuka alluded to, one is predominantly sexually transmitted, not exclusively, but predominantly sexually transmitted, and so it comes with a certain certain nuances the moment there's that declaration that someone is HIV positive, which I think we are almost overcoming as a country. Whereas COVID-19 is, loosely put, an airborne disease. That in itself presents two different risks. There is no record of a person getting HIV from sitting in the same office as a person who is HIV positive. But too many cases of people getting COVID-19 just by virtue of sitting with a person who has COVID-19. So that could actually form some of the discussions that people could be having in companies. Because of the response to HIV, I think we did note how late we took upon ARVs. Our fear is that if we take as long to take and embrace an intervention that is freeing up the rest of the world, we soon would have COVID-19, an African disease, and I would hate to see it as a Zambian disease, as it were. So it's a balancing act between all those aspects of these two diseases that are being compared, because even the work policies around these two diseases are not comparable. The two are quite very different. The submission for now.
Thank you so much. This question will go to, I think, the two ministries. We have seen clear guidelines on, ailments like tuberculosis, especially in places like, the mining areas or construction areas where, pneumoconiosis examinations are required. And the clear guidelines are that somebody who would have even just a history of tuberculosis would basically be deemed not fit to be able to work in places like this. Do we see a situation where somebody may be exempted from work for matters related to COVID, or for matters related to them not being vaccinated, either now or in the future?
Who do you want to go first? Maybe Dr. Sampa go first.
All right.
Yeah, there are two aspects to that. There is the short term and the long term. In the short term, I think there exists quite enough guidelines and to some extent legal documents that would stop a person who has an active disease from showing up from work. We do not expect a person with COVID-19 fevers around 39 degrees and basically symptomatic coming coughing to work. I think that is really not expected. Enough guidelines exist around that. I can cite SI 21 and 22. 22 speaking to the fact that COVID-19 is a notifiable disease, and there are guidelines and laws that guide on how a notifiable disease is treated. So in the short term, enough exists. In the long term, there is actually potential, because there's such a thing as long COVID. There are people who never shed off symptoms. Sadly, somebody could develop a headache, and it's a headache for life. Such a person might not work where there are a lot of vibrations and things of that sort. Some people have so much damage to their lungs that they require an oxygen tank nearby them persistently. I don't think that's a person you can send underground. So to some extent, even if at the moment, directly, that may not be the case, as you've referred to TB, for instance, even if that is under review because it has to be redefined. Some people get cured from TB completely. So that blanket guideline is being looked at. I see something quite very similar for COVID-19, particularly for those that suffer quite devastating sequelae as a result of COVID-19. Over to you, PS.
Thank you very much. I think I can't put it any better than the way you've put it. People may wish to understand that the Occupation and Safety Institute is quite strict in terms of people who go underground. Those of us that have gone underground, and mostly they will tell you the environment in which that place is. It's not quite a very user-friendly with a person with very, bad history of TB or pneumoconiosis. It really requires that it is for the benefit of the person, rather than the issues to the rights. Can I work? Can I not work? Is that inadvisable? Like, for instance, we have a program under workers' compensation of retraining. People that come out of that, they can be retrained and be taken elsewhere where they are, they are in better condition. Because even if a person has come out of TB, doctor may agree with me on that. That if you take them underground again, in the conditions that are very, very bad, other things can really trigger in. So really, it's for safety reasons why you see that the histories of pneumosis, histories of TB, we usually want people to work on surface rather than underground, because of actually the environment that is there. But with rights changing, with maybe the advances that have made in medicine, maybe, like you said, it's something that can change in future. So it's something that we are looking out at. But for the very fact that the first line of our orientation is that we must preserve that life, and probably a guide that this is the direction that you shouldn't go, because it's just for your own benefit. So the laws that will compel, like you said, it's difficult. They can't. You can't succeed. But like I said, conditions can. And I gave a good example that you say, oh, this you can do. I think I was listening to the discussion between the submission between by ED and the GSA. There's something that is very fundamental. If you make a condition that this bus takes only people that are positive, COVID negative, and then you show up with COVID and want to insist to get on the same bus, the employer can say, no, you can't get on this bus, but you can use other means. Or you can choose to not get on a bus. I will not get a job. I will not get a mask. For instance, just mask on the bus. It is preventive measures, but you can't show up on a bus. I'm going to get on this bus without a mask, whether you like it or not. They'll tell you, no, buy your car and drive without a mask. So these conditions can be put in place so that we protect the bigger communities that are there. They are not forcing you, but they're creating conditions which say, if you meet this, do this. If you don't meet this, there are other options that you can actually choose, which are to dispose. So the hard first rule is that you must prevent the spread of COVID from others. Not, really, I would say probably for a lack of a better careless, the vaccine is there, the masks are there, whatever, the education is there. Maybe that is what we need to really, really intensify. It's the issues of sensitization. We can't get tired of it. Like, now we've exercised enough. No, it's not possible. There'll always be that one person with a negative mind around it. And we have a responsibility to actually get to that person and to convince them that this is good for themselves. That is exactly on the part of that work on public health and stuff. And also, you address the issues on protection of information. Really, it's not good that when I have COVID, then it should go and against my will. Then it is, maybe my secretary gets it and said, the boss now has COVID. So stop coming for, that kind of information must always be protected by the Ministry of Health. And I think they were straight on that from day one. And I really appreciate them for that, because they said confidentiality of your health status is something that they uphold very much. And we are happy. It's good that on. And I should also state on, and that is something that is really emphasized. One of the other points I must say is the issue of COVID and productivity. This may be another topic for another day, because as my ministry, as you know, we also have a national productivity development department, and it's a discussion that we can also start to have. How productive are people that are, before they get COVID, after COVID? What can we do to ensure that they remain productive? Because like Doc said, there are people that have long-term effects. How do we help them remain productive and beyond the COVID-19? So the hard and fast is that let's do more sensitization. Let's not discriminate. Let's make sure that we create the policies that become very informative to the workers. Create the clubs that are health, in fact, safety and health clubs at place of work. Mind you, have Occupational Safety Health Act. We require that you have a safety and health club at your place of work, because this is something that we can have the employees discuss most of the issues that affect them in terms of public health, occupational health, and the safety at the place of work. So that is what my submission will be.
Thank you so much. We have in excess of, I think, 50 questions remaining, but in the interest of time, we will try and wind up very quickly. There's one pressing question that has been forwarded, and the question reads as follows. Is there a third option, or are we limited to choosing between being vaccinated or not? Do other solutions work? For example, we've heard of solutions around drugs like ivermectin. Specifically, we read publications that have suggested that 60 studies have been conducted about the effectiveness of ivermectin. According to a comment that was published on a certain website, the probability that an ineffective treatment generated results as positive as the 60 studies to date is estimated to be 1 in 193 billion, which gives us a p-value of 0.001. 0, 0. I don't know how many zeros are there, but there's 52 at the end. Your reaction, gentlemen, to that question?
No, I think that is the target to the dog. I wouldn't want to express my ignorance on that and try to mislead people. So I think the doctor is in a bit of this to speak to them.
All right.
Okay. Let me take the first bite at this in case Francis, the immunization guru, has something to add. That would be great. Now, they're asking, is there a third option? It will be very interesting to know what is the first and second option, but that's a story for another day. But the recommendations we make about every medication that is used for COVID-19 is based on science, all right? Right at the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak, it was clear that we needed to come up with some sort of medications that either would cure the disease or at least alleviate some of the symptoms that are associated with the disease or some of the destruction, for example, like the massive inflammation. So WHO, working with various partners, came up with very clear protocols on how to do these studies. And also there was an identification of some of the chemicals or some of the promising treatments that could be tested among the people. So a lot of studies have gone on that actually were able to tell us, yes, you're excited about chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine, debunk that one, it doesn't work. Another study showed us that dexamethasone was very useful and it has been included. So what has been happening as the disease has unfolded is that when studies are done using very clear protocols that are well regulated according to methods that everybody agrees and a promising result comes out, we adjust our guidelines. Now, turning to ivermectin, because it has made a lot of waves, there are ongoing studies, some of which have followed these protocols, some of which have not. And unfortunately, it is some of those that have not followed the protocols that are given a lot of prominence. But what we've done as WHO, working with various partners, is to try and bring all these studies to do what we call a meta-analysis. You combine different studies and then try to see if it has a positive impact, depending upon what your outcomes were. Were you looking at ability to prevent infection? Were you looking at ability to prevent hospitalization? Were you looking at ability to prevent? So you set the rules. And so far, from the data that has been available to WHO, it does not seem like ivermectin has a benefit as yet, all right? So what I will say about it, therefore, is that studies are still ongoing. Maybe one of that will do, but for more the studies I've looked at, in fact, yesterday I was looking at a journal club review of ivermectin, it does not seem to have the benefits people are giving. But also in the question, people were saying that, what about steaming, nostril washing, and all these things? What I would just say is that the science is not there available for us yet to make recommendations on that. So what I will say is that for now, let us keep away from ivermectin, and the recommendation we have as WHO is unless it is being used in clinical trials that will help us to answer this particular question. Now, some of the other things that came in this question, like steaming and so on and so forth, I think I need to mention something about steaming. Whenever you have, say, a common flu and your nose is congested and you turn on your shower in the morning, turn it full blast, close the windows and doors, and then you get into that shower. By the time you come out of the shower, you feel some relief with the congestion in the nose. So it's a physiological thing that can happen when you have congestion in the nose. But in terms of whether it will cure or stop you from getting COVID, there is no science to show that. But in terms of bringing relief, if your problem is congestion in the nose, it will do that. But also I need to warn people on things like steaming and so on. There are people who've got burnt, who've got side effects as a result of using this. So we need to use it very carefully. So the point is that when we get more information, that has been collected using standard protocols that everybody agrees and they have been peer reviewed, then we keep updating our guidance accordingly. I'll stop there, maybe pass it on to Dien if he has something to add.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bachaita. Probably not necessary to add. Beyond what you said, just add that there are these three drugs that probably fall in the same category. So there is ivermectin, hydrochloroquine, and azithromycin. Same discussion for a very long time, but I think the answer is as has been put. The science does not yet support the use of those for any of those purposes. Unfortunately, sometimes science gets politicized, so conspiracy theories start to say, and unfortunately for you, Dr. Bachaita, your institution gets mentioned all the time, that because you don't, like the manufacturers or things of that sort. But I think I get the sense that the first two options that are being referred to is A, not get vaccinated, and B, get vaccinated, and therefore they are asking for a third option. Maybe somebody could consider testing every so often, probably every day. When they test positive, they stay away, and then afterwards they continue testing again. I don't know why someone would take such a difficult choice. Any other option, really, any other option, as long as we live with COVID-19, is a difficult option. The best one can do is, as much as possible, ask your way out about what these vaccines do. Unfortunately, it's a basket. Have your choice on what will make you comfortable. Just one shot or two shots. And then you continue with the 5 golden rules until such a time that probably there's different guidance for people who are vaccinated. It's as simple as that. Anything else that you think about is very complex. So the third option is testing every day. You better be ready for that.
All right. I'll just try and sample a few questions here, and then we're gonna close. There's a question around breastfeeding mothers. And pregnant women, are vaccines safe for them? If you could quickly maybe comment on that, Doc. Either Dr. Mwansa or Dr. Nathan.
Dr. Mwansa, that is his bread and butter.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's correct. At least it has been for the last 7 years. Yeah. The simple answer to that is yes. Now, let me say quickly 3 things about it. One is that when we speak of risk to COVID-19, the categories you have mentioned, ranking top, pregnant mothers. Nearly every day I hear a story of a pregnant mother rushed to theater, mother dies, baby survives. The risk for COVID-19 mothers is quite high. Number 2 is that quite a lot of studies have been done. We've just spoken about studies related to ivermectin, hydrochloroquine, and azithromycin. Plenty of studies have been done. And including all authorities you can speak of now are speaking the same voice in terms of the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine.
And looks like we've lost the talk.
Okay, we can maybe go to any other question because it's lost them. Yeah.
All right. There's a question here for Dr. Nathan. Do you agree that enough tests and research has been done on the side effects of vaccines on lactating mothers? That's to the child being breastfed and the pregnant mother themselves.
I think by nature of vaccines, there being new compounds, when you do the initial tests, you may not target pregnant women per se because their physiology changes. But what happens that in the course of doing the tests, some women get pregnant, they conceive. So what we do is we collect information on those. And also there are ongoing studies for particular vaccines that are being done on pregnant women. So far, the information we have, whether a woman got it inadvertently and got pregnant, or got it and was pregnant, or was pregnant already, would suggest that we don't have safety concerns about pregnant women getting vaccines, and also lactating mothers, those who are breastfeeding the children. So there's no risk to that. You have to compare the risk of getting COVID or the risk that might be there if you took the vaccine. So we find that the benefit of a mother taking, a pregnant woman or a lactating mother taking the vaccine far outweighs the risk that could come to them. So for now, especially if that mother works in a situation which exposes them to risk of getting infected with COVID. So I think the information right now would suggest it is okay for them to get it, but more data is being collected. Francis, I tried to step in your big shoes when you went off, but now that you are back, take it over.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what happened, but I was basically making my last point that the vaccine does not cross the placenta to get to the baby. The vaccine does not get into the breast milk to get to the baby when they are breastfeeding. What crosses the placenta and gets the baby are the antibodies, the resultant antibodies as a result of the vaccine, which are protective to both the baby and the mother. So based on that, including, I think, the International Federation of Gynecologists and Obstetricians, they've come out clean and indicated that COVID-19 vaccines, the ones that we have that are being used globally, the 15 of them are very safe for pregnant women. And a high recommendation is there for pregnant women, given that pregnancy itself actually, and immediately after, remember, a person who delivers today is just as at risk of anything as a person who was pregnant yesterday. So that state of being pregnant, which continues even after delivery, is a risk factor for COVID-19. So highly recommended. They are safe and they are very protective for those.
Within a minute, Dr. Mansa, there's a question for you here. To what extent is Zambia looking at local scientists to develop a vaccine?
Yes, in fact, that agenda is probably not only a Zambian agenda, it's an African agenda. But since you ask about Zambia, yes, in terms of R&D, we probably could be a few months, years away, but that's a discussion that we are in. We have in this country. I would probably not be too optimistic to say in the next 2 years or really.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, I think we have still a lot more questions here. If we were to go through all these questions, I'm afraid we may have to probably overnight and then continue through the morning. So I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to say thank you so much, gentlemen, for having made time. We will share these questions with you. If you would have time, we would like you to give us your notes on some of these questions, and then we can circulate to everybody that has attended this discussion forum, so that we can give them the benefit of having gotten a response to the questions that have been raised. At this time, we will just invite for the closing remarks. I'm looking for the Vice President of the Zambia Institute of Human Resource Management. I'm not sure I can see him there. Let me invite the President to just close for us, and just to thank everyone for having made time to be able to attend this session. Thank you so much. President?
Thank you, Council Secretary and Moderator for this afternoon. Yeah, let me take this opportunity to thank our discussants. I think you've done justice to the topic. Of course, I saw a lot of offshoots of other topics that we can bring into the future. So allow me to, on behalf of HR practitioners in Zambia and beyond, to thank you for your time this afternoon. The information you've shared definitely will make a difference in terms of the way forward in our workplace. Yeah, so to the members, I think the vaccine is here. All of us, let's go and get the vaccine so that we can even make our workplaces even safer. So the doctors talk about herd immunity. Herd immunity is not just in the community, even at workplace. The more you get vaccinated, the workplace becomes safer. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon. The session is closed. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it.